Good evening. Welcome to New Horizons. If you have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please. Thank you. Right, massive welcome back to Andrew Johnson with Comets, Calamities and Planet X. Tonight, Andrew casts his gaze skywards and back in history to our visitors, the comets, asteroids and the mysterious Planet X. Andrew prefers to deal with evidence, as evidenced by his superb website, over the W's, checktheevidence.com. Andrew will focus on recorded data from 2 space probes, recent cometary, close calls, astronomical observations and major Earth strikes in modern times, one in England and one in Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andrew Johnson.
Very much. It's wonderful to be back here with you all again. It seems to get better every time I come. I got chocolate biscuits tonight, which has never happened before. I was treated like royalty. It's fantastic, you know. It's brilliant. So I'd like to thank everyone for setting up the equipment tonight and all the hard work that goes into that. Thanks to Rob and Chrissy for their wonderful hospitality when I come and visit. Thanks to everyone here for coming, particularly those that have come a long way. And I've got some DVDs there, as you see, which I sell for 50p. And I've got just 2 or 3 booklets left, because I haven't had time to print any more. And I've got a couple of the Judy Wood books, which people may know I've been associated with for a few years now. And we're running out of the current stock of those, so if you want to get a copy of the Judy Wood book without paying the excessive postage, which has just gone up again, then they're £25. But tonight I'm not talking about 9/11. Rob's already done the brief introduction. For those that don't know me, I work part-time for the Open University. I tutor on a course called Technologies in Practice, and I assess students with disabilities for access to equipment for higher education. So my degree was in computer science and physics, but I'm not an astronomer, although I have had a strong interest in astronomy since I was about 10 years old, and I think I know a little bit about astronomy, hopefully. So I'll try and go through this. I've got various video clips and stuff. We might have to fiddle with the sound slightly, so please bear with me if we have any little technical hitches. Okay, so we're going to look, as Rob said in brief, we're going to look at data about comets. We're going to look at data about the alleged Planet X, which a lot of people have been talking about, particularly in the run-up to 2012, which of course has now been and gone. We're going to look at predictions about the end of the world, which tied into 2012, and a bit of a history of these predictions, or some of them. And to help us understand comets and Planet X, we will look at the scale of the solar system. I've come to realise that not as many people as I thought actually understand and appreciate the scale of the solar system. And you have to understand this if you're going to understand or know about Planet X. You know, where is it? How far away is it? What size will it be? Well, I'm going to try and cover some of that data and explain to you, where I'm coming from on that. I also want to talk about comets. For example, Comet Wild 2 and Comet Halley and Comet Tempel 1, because all of those comets have had probes sent to them, and we've got data back from those probes, right? So, since I was a kid, there was a big build-up to Comet Halley's reappearance in 1986, and I watched Comet Halley through a 12-inch telescope when I was down the road at Lancaster University. So there was a big build-up to that, and that was one of the first comets that had a probe sent to it, Giotto. So we're going to talk about some of that data and what's significant about it. Because, of course, as you know from the themes that I cover here, I'm not just going to be giving you what comes off the NASA website or what they say, is what it means. I'm going to tell you what I think it means based on other things that I've talked about here as well. We're going to look at the story of Comet Hale-Bopp and the troubling way it was linked to an end-of-world prediction, right? Because there's quite a significant story there that maybe some of you will know, some of you perhaps not heard of. And it links directly into people that are currently doing the rounds on the internet as well. We're also going to look at the Tunguska event of 1908, and I've got a clip from an old documentary series which many may remember fondly. I've got a 10-minute clip from that. And we're also going to mention the possible decimation of England in 562 by a cometary impact, which has been written about by Alan Wilson in his books. And then we'll look at the Chelyabinsk meteor as well a little bit. And I was actually, before I go into this, I was actually asked to put this presentation together by somebody I know in Derby, Omar Fowler, who runs a UFO group there, when everyone was talking about Comet Ison. So I've got a good bit about Comet Ison, which had an apparition in November last year. But I'll come to that later. So that's why I ended up putting this together. So what is the scale of the solar system? Well, let's have a look, shall we? A few of the things. So we'll start off with one of the inner planets, Mercury. It's 36 million miles from the Sun, right? So it's roughly a third of the distance away from the Sun that we are. We're about 93 million miles, the Earth. Look at the diameter of Mercury, it's 3,000 miles. We're at nearly 8,000 miles. The orbit of Mercury is 88 days. The Earth is obviously 365.25 days. The average temperature ranges between -183 and 427 centigrade, and we're 14 degrees. So I'm not going to read all of this out, obviously, but if we get out to Jupiter, the average distance is 483 million miles. That's 480, so 500 million miles, roughly. That's the rough. But of course, when you look at Jupiter, that you're looking out to it, well, I'll try and explain this on the next slide, the distance varies a lot, and you'll see why on the next slide. Saturn is roughly twice as far away as Jupiter, 800 million miles. Uranus, again, double that distance. Neptune, not quite double again. Pluto, which is no longer classed as a planet, is classed as a planetoid, too small to be classed as a planet. 4,584 million miles. Billion. It's 4 billion miles, basically, 4.5 billion miles. 4,584 million miles. And it has an orbit of 248 years. So that's just a quick run through the scale. Now, what we've also got to realise is we want to get a good feel for these distances so that we can talk sensibly about Planet X, which I'm going to come on to. And if you're going to talk in scientific terms, the typical unit that they use when they're talking about the solar system is what's called an astronomical unit. An astronomical unit is the distance, or the average distance, from the Earth to the Sun, and it's approximately 100 million miles. So that's what we're going to be thinking of in terms of when we're talking about distances in this presentation. So here we go, look. Jupiter is about 5 astronomical units away from the Sun, and it's between 4 and 6 astronomical units away from us, right? Saturn is about 9 astronomical units away from the Sun. That's between 8 and 10. So remember, if you look at this, you see, at various points in the Earth's orbit, we can be one side of the Sun, where the planet is the opposite side of the Sun. So you've got to add or subtract another astronomical unit to the average distance. You see what I mean? So you've got to think about things like that. That's why, for example, Mars at the moment is coming nearer to us, because it's on the same side of the Sun as us. And we're going to see it much significantly larger in telescopes than, to your naked eye, it'll still look the same. It's a red dot in the sky. But in telescopes, it'll look larger. The same is true of the outer planets. They can be on the same side of us, which is called superior conjunction, I think. And then if they're on the opposite side, they're in inferior conjunction. I might have got those the wrong way around, but that's what they put in the astronomy books. Okay? So think about that. When you look at these planets, they could be on the same side of the Sun as we are, and they're therefore closer to us, or they could be on the opposite side of the Sun, and then they look much further away. So again, a quick picture of the solar system that somebody drew up. I didn't draw this. You're going out. So basically, Pluto is about 100 times as far from the Sun as Mercury. 100 times. 10 to the 2. So it's a long way out. It's a long way out. Pluto wasn't discovered until 1930 by Clyde Tombaugh. All right? So it's smaller than the Moon. All right? So again, relative sizes, we've got the huge planets like Jupiter and Saturn, which Jupiter's the biggest. I think Saturn's about 2/3 the size. I could go back to that other table. I'm not too concerned with that. I'm more concerned with the distances and the relative sizes. We've also had some new dwarf planets discovered as well, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on. Sedna, and there's about 4 or 5 dwarf planets. Sedna is one. Makemake is another one, which you've probably never heard of. But it is now possible to detect planetoids and dwarf planets a long way away, way out beyond the orbit of Pluto with the more advanced equipment we've got now. So Quasar is approximately 800 miles in diameter. 800 miles is tiny. 800 miles is tiny. That's, you know, the size of Britain from top to bottom, just, well, roughly. Britain's probably about 550 miles top to bottom, so it's not much bigger than Britain. And it's further away from the Sun than Pluto, and they say it's primarily made of ices. This is from one of the NASA websites. And Makemake is the other one. Its diameter 950 miles, that's 1,500 kilometres. It is the third largest trans-Neptunian object after Eris and Pluto. It was originally designated 2005 FY9. So these have been observed with some type of either radio telescope or with an optical telescope. And it's, yeah. So we've got Eris, and this is, let's see, I'm trying to find the size on there. This object is about the same size as Pluto and currently about 3 times farther away from the Sun than Pluto. 3 times farther away. That makes it roughly 12 billion miles away. 12 billion miles. Right? And it's smaller than the Moon. They can see it, they can detect its movements. It's a long way out. Sedna, that was quite a bit of press about this. They said it was like a 10th planet. And I think if you look at that name in mythology, some people attached meaning to the mythology, and I forget what Sedna means, but it's a mythical figure in mythology, but I can't remember what it means. It was discovered in 2003. It is roughly 3 times further away than Pluto, again about 12 billion miles, outside the Kuiper Belt. You'll see about the Kuiper Belt in a video clip I've got shortly. And it is approximately 1,000 miles in diameter and takes nearly 10,500 years to go around the Sun just once. So they've confirmed from measurements over periods of months or days or weeks that it does indeed go around our Sun. It belongs to our solar system. But it's a long way out and has a very long orbit. So this picture here attempts to give you a picture of the scale of some of these orbits. So this is the inner solar system. I don't know if we can get the front lights down a bit here because some of this projector doesn't seem very bright. But basically, this is the inner solar system here. And then if you expand these lines out here, hopefully you can just see those lines. This is then the outer solar system. And then you go, that's better. And then you go to this picture here, and you've got the inner solar system in the middle of this ellipse. And then you go right out to what's called the Oort cloud. So some of these objects that have been detected are a long way out, 12 billion miles. 12 billion miles. And these are the relative sizes. So you see, there's the Moon. Pluto is smaller than the Moon. Quoar is smaller than Pluto. Sedna is about a little bit smaller than Pluto, and then you've got the Earth this size. So these are tiny objects that have been picked up 12 billion miles away, one with a 10,500-year orbit. Just bear those figures in mind if you can. I know I've reeled off very quickly a lot of figures, but the summary of that is they've detected some pretty small objects a long way off, right? Now, of course, this information has come from NASA and so on, and the European Space Agency and other observatories. So, yeah, they can cover stuff up. They can cover stuff up. I've talked about that, right? But you'll see where I'm going with this soon. We now come to the Minor Planet Centre, which is a website you can go onto. Now, as I said, I prepared this presentation back in November, and the Minor Planet Centre has amateur observations submitted to it. You can get some pretty advanced amateur equipment now. You know, it might cost you a few £1,000s, but there is, as we'll come on, this is Comet Ison, for example, which we're going to come on to, was picked up by an amateur network. It wasn't picked up by professional astronomers. The Minor Planet Centre, or MPC, is the single worldwide location for receipt and distribution of positional measurements of minor planets, comets, and outer irregular natural satellites of the major planets. The table on the left is for November 2013. So if you look, near-Earth objects discovered in November last year. This month, 35. 35 objects which come within, I think, 1 million miles. They're classed as near-Earth objects. 35 were discovered last November. Last year, up to November, 888 were discovered. And all time, 10,000. So minor planets discovered. This is minor planets discovered now. 352 were discovered in November, minor planets, last year. You can go and look at this. You can look at today's figures if you go onto this website, www.minorplanetcentre.net. You can go and look at this month's comets discovered. There were 3 comets discovered in November last year. 3. 56 discovered last year. 56 new comets discovered. All time 3,775. All on the Minor Planet Centre. These are primarily made by amateurs. These comets are named after amateurs. Amateur detection of near-Earth objects. I'm not going to read all of this out, but question, is it possible for an amateur astronomer to assist with detecting near-Earth asteroids or comets? If so, what would be the minimum telescopic aperture and type of photographic equipment required to conduct this kind of research? And the answer to that is that amateur astronomers can and do play an important part in detecting near-Earth objects. Today, more than 5% of all near-Earth objects are discovered by amateurs, and this proportion is on the increase due to the more increased sophistication of equipment that's available, if you've got the money to buy it. MinorPlanetCentre.net, based at Harvard University, is the organisation responsible for cataloguing and archiving all discoveries of small bodies. Why would amateur astronomers want to be bothering with this stuff, seeing these little, almost indiscernible dots in the sky? Well, how about getting a comet named after you? Wouldn't that be pretty cool? That's what they're after. They're after that sort of fame. They want a comet to be named after them. And Hale-Bopp, discovered by Alan Hale and I forget the name of the Bopp, the first name of the Bopp guy. That was a typical example. That was named, and Hyakutake was another one that comes to mind. Comet Kohoutek. These are named after the people that discovered them. That goes into the history books. It's a good way to get into the astronomical history books, and quite fun if you can discover a new comet. So that's what drives these people. And you need what's called a CCD detector. It's a bit like what's in a digital camera. You know, these sensors that are now in digital cameras. Put them into a telescope and you can detect very faint objects, and you don't have to keep forking out to get your photographs developed. Because it used to be the case, of course, you'd photograph the sky, you know, going back to when I got interested in astronomy in the 80s, when I started to get involved in the astronomy club, you'd have to get 1000 ASA film, stick it in an SLR camera with a 50mm lens, point it at the sky, attach it to your telescope, hope you caught something, go and develop the image, you know, and see what was on it. And then if you were lucky, you'd get 2 pictures, you could put them on a blink comparator, and you might find a comet on there if you were lucky. Nowadays, you can have an automated computer program, scans the sky, takes a CCD image, saves it on your hard drive, takes another CCD image the next night, you compare that, you do a flash comparison on your screen, and you can see if anything in that star field has moved. And you can do probably a significant proportion of the sky every night if you've got the right software. That's what you can do now. That's why more of these objects are being discovered by amateurs. That's one of the reasons. So there you go. Amateurs play an important role in the discovery of comets. Right, but we haven't talked about what comets are. So we're going to talk about what comets are. Are they lumps of rock? Are they harbingers of doom? You know, everyone's seen the story about Comet Halley appearing in the Bayeux Tapestry from 1066, it being, you know, an omen to King Harold, and so on. So what I've got here is a clip from the very nice electric comet video, which I've used a couple of clips from, and I'm going to play this to explain what comets are, or what you're told that they are, and I don't think that's always totally correct, as we're going to see.
It was only in the mid-20th century that a scientific consensus emerged on the nature of comets. In 1950, astronomer Fred Whipple proposed a model that came to be known as the dirty snowball hypothesis. Whipple envisioned comets as conglomerates of frozen gases, mainly water, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide, together with the primordial dust of the early solar system. But a dilemma had to be solved. Comets lose considerable material at each pass around the sun. This means that the comets we see cannot have been around all that long. So the Dutch astronomer Jan Oort envisioned a vast horde of icy objects circling the sun about 1,000 times more distant than remote Pluto. He imagined that after billions of years, one of these dirty snowballs could be deflected from the icy cloud by a passing star. It might then fall into the inner solar system to produce an active comet. As astronomers came to accept the idea, they called this theoretical source of comets the Oort cloud. But by the 1990s, it became clear that numerous objects circle the Sun at much closer distances than the conjectured Oort cloud. Astronomers came to imagine short-term comets originating from a disk of debris called the Kuiper belt, extending outward from Neptune's orbit. But then advanced computer simulations suggested that Kuiper belt objects were too stable to be the source of most short-term comets. One surprise at a time, the origin of comets has become increasingly uncertain. But always it is assumed that comets are composed of dust and ice warmed by the sun to create a coma and tail, leaving a rind of dust. The theory suggests that beneath the blackened, shallow crust, pockets of gas form. At critical moments, the pressure breaks through the surface, creating jets blasting vapor and dust away from the nucleus. But how well does this popular theory explain what we've more recently learned about comets?
Well, we're going to see exactly how much it explains about what we've learned about comets. And you can watch that whole video online. It's about an hour long. As it seems to be a few bits of it are repeated, but it's a very good video, very well put together. And I'm going to use another clip of that in a few minutes. So comets and asteroids, as we've already seen briefly, comets are now being discovered almost every week. Few of these comets will ever become visible to us on Earth. Most will remain as almost invisible blobs in the images captured by professional and advanced amateur astronomers. Standard astronomy more or less considers comets to be in elliptical orbits with one focus closer to the Sun. When they get close to the Sun, they develop a visible tail. Asteroids are normally thought to stay in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, or when sometimes they may come closer to the Earth, and when that happens, they're called near-Earth objects, a term I've already mentioned tonight. And I think they have a definition. I think it's when they come within 1 million miles that they're said to be near-Earth objects. So the boundaries, definition between these two objects is actually more blurred than you might think, and more blurred than some of the NASA people, I think, will acknowledge. But again, what I want to try and focus on is a concept of distances. And we're going to talk about some of the famous comets that have been discovered just briefly. Of course, the one comet that most people have heard of is Comet Halley, not Halley. That was Bill Haley, and the Comets was a rock group, nothing to do with Halley, as it's sometimes called. It may have even been, as I say, Halley rather than Halley. He didn't really discover it, but he was the first to calculate when it should come back, and that he did that in 1705. And the size of the actual rocky nucleus is approximately 9 by 5 miles. 9 by 5 miles. That's very small. Comet Hale-Bopp, which was discovered by Alan, in fact I've got his name here, I couldn't remember it, Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp. It was discovered on the 23rd of July 1995, and look where it was when it was discovered. It was 670 million miles from the Sun. That's in between the orbit of Jupiter and Saturn. And Comet Halley, where they knew it was coming, so they knew roughly where to look, that was discovered when it was 1 billion miles away from the Sun. They used a special detector, but it was 1 billion miles from the Sun when they re-imaged it for the first time. Closest distance to the Earth, well, Hale-Bopp came within 120 million miles, so it was still a fair distance, and the size of the nucleus was 19 to 25 miles. Comet Wild 2, I know it says Wild, but I think it was German or possibly Dutch. That was discovered in 1978, and it was discovered when it was 500 million miles from the Earth, and it came closest to the Sun on 22nd of Feb. Perihelion, I've got this column here which I haven't explained. Perihelion means closest approach to the Sun, right? And it became within 62 million miles of the Sun, and the size of the nucleus, 2 miles across. It's 500 million miles from the Sun, 2 miles across. This amateur discovered it. Think about that. Comet Ison, which was one I put this together for, it was discovered by Vital Nevsky and Anton Northanks. I can't really read it on here so well, but yeah, I've got their names later in the presentation. 2 Russian guys, I believe. It was discovered on the 24th of September 2012, and it was 590 million miles from the Sun. That's further away than Jupiter for most of the discovered on, and its perihelion date was the 26th of December last year, 4 months ago. Closest to the Earth, it came within 40 million miles, so it's sort of as close as a bit closer than Mars gets sometimes. Size of the nucleus, 3 miles across. 3 miles across. It was 600 million miles away when it was discovered by amateurs, not by NASA. It was 3 miles across. Now, for example, Hale-Bopp. I took these pictures, very easy to take. I had a true print film, if anyone remembers true print, 400 ASA lens, 50mm camera. The camera cost about 20 quid, second hand. And I had a 200mm lens as well, and I was exposing for 10 to 15 seconds on a tripod. And this was just when I lived in Nottingham that I took these pictures. They were some of the first pictures that I put on the internet back in about 1997 or 1998 when I put these up. Easy to take, easy to image. So, I think you can see a little bit where I'm going with this. If amateurs can see objects which are 3 miles across out beyond the orbit of Jupiter, you know where I'm going with this now, hopefully. But before I go there, which we'll come back to in a bit, I want to talk particularly about Comet Hale-Bopp, because when people talked about Planet X, I was basically telling them what I'm telling you now, not in as much detail. But I would also tell them this story of the Hale-Bopp and the companion object. All right? A chap called Chuck Schramek, well, we're going to cover this story, and I was very interested in this story. And it took me quite a long time. It took me probably a couple of weeks to get to the bottom of this messy, confused, and tragic story, as you'll hear. Now, the story goes like this. Chuck Schramek was an amateur astronomer, and he had a fairly good telescope, a fairly good sort of amateur setup for the time. And the image on the right, this image here, it was taken by Chuck Schramek, and it garnered a lot of attention due to his appearance on the Art Bell show, that's Coast to Coast, as it became Coast to Coast, on the 18th and 19th of November 1996. So this was a few months before they knew Hale-Bopp was going to be in our skies. And from Chuck Schramek's website, he's dead now, Chuck Schramek. He died in, I think, 2001, was it? Or 2007, I can't remember, I should remember. He was quite young when he died. Here's a picture that I took that caused such a stir on November the 15th, 1996. I simply asked, what's that satellite thing near the comet? All hell broke loose. This is this thing here. So this is the comet. You can see a bit of the tail here, and this thing here is the object that he didn't know what it was. He likened it to Saturn because it's got a slight sort of, looks as if you see in the rings that edge on this effect here. All hell broke loose, including blaming me for the mass suicide of a strange group in California. Real astronomers say the thing I photographed is a star distorted by my telescope. I have recently taken a picture of the very same area of the sky. It had been impossible to photograph for several months because of the proximity of the sun. My new pictures clearly prove with digital clarity that the thing in the above photo is not this star alone. Is not, this star alone, which the star they say I mistook for the thing is much dimmer and it does not produce a ring effect. For that matter, no star I have ever photographed, and I photographed thousands, produced this odd ring effect. So people were claiming that this was a star, and he said it wasn't, based on his own observations. So I checked into that, which I'll come back to. So this, as I say, is Chuck Schramek. And there were press conferences, and people made all kinds of claims about what he said, saying that he'd, fed this to the Heaven's Gate group and all of this. But we'll go on a little bit. Months before I took this picture, I smelled a cover-up of the good pictures of the comet. The pictures from the major observatories went away from the web in May of 1996. The Hubble's pictures went away in October of 1995. Hubble pictures were deliberately degraded. This is why I decided to launch my own observation campaign. It got so silly that NASA and JPL were posting crappier pictures than I could take. I now think I have a good grasp of why they were covering up the pictures. This is Schremek. Good close-up pictures of the comet nucleus revealed a cosmology that contradicted the accepted paradigm. To a few fearless astronomers willing to really look at the evidence, comets reveal a much different solar system history. It's a history that includes other technological civilizations on other planets only several million years ago. Now then, I'm going to show you why he was wrong about this image, but this paragraph that I've highlighted in blue, I think he's absolutely right about that. So I think he was onto something there, but he was wrong about this. Alan Hale, the co-discoverer of Comet Hale-Bopp, eventually did an analysis of Chuck Schramek's image, right? And what he basically came to the conclusion was that if you look at this image from Schramek's image, if you go back again, this is Schramek's image, and I've ringed the two stars, and I've ringed the two stars here. This object here was a known star, right? So it turned out that Schramek had misidentified a known star. Now, Schramek claimed that this wasn't the case, but what it actually turns out is that he was using some computer software to actually determine what these stars were in his field of view, all right? Polar image of the same field of view is nothing more than the bright 9th magnitude star appearing in the DSS image, which is the polar image. It also shows a diffraction effect. See also the spikes from the same star in the DSS image, so you can see he's only got one pair of sort of lines going that way, diffraction lines these are, but this is a higher quality image, so you've got it going both ways, this starburst effect. A phenomenon which has been known and understood for centuries. So what it turns out, I'm not going to read all of this out, but he was using this star catalogue, which was called, let's see, I'm trying to think. I think it was called Stellar. Megastar, that's it. He was using this PC software package called Megastar. And I've got one of these. I've got one called Redshift, and you can get other versions now. There's even ones you can download for Linux, which is free, like Stellarium is one for Linux. See, what you can do is you can switch on and off various categories of objects that are in the sky. You can switch the planets off, you can switch the stars on and off, you can switch the stars' names on and off, you can switch off all the stars with a certain brightness, which is called magnitude. Magnitude means how bright the star is. The higher the number of magnitude, the fainter the object is. It's a logarithmic scale, and it's kind of counterintuitive. So with this, what he'd done is, he had the default settings for the megastar, which didn't show objects below, I think, the 8th magnitude or something. So when he looked at his screen, this star was not shown on his screen. So he was going by his software to identify what star it was, but he'd accidentally, or just not knowingly, left some of the stars switched off. And if you modified that setting to switch on all the stars, you indeed would have seen this star in the field of view. So his mistake was an honest mistake. He never admitted his mistake, but his original mistake was an honest one. He hadn't quite set his software up to recognise what the star was. Because if you looked at this object, it would have been, and for where it was, if it was actually near the comet, physically in space, it would have been the size of the Earth. It would have been a huge object. It would have been the size of the Earth. Okay, and I'm going to come back to that story and what happened with it. But bear in mind that he misidentified this object and thought that it was a huge planet. You know, I wondered if what he'd identified was Planet X in the 90s. That's what I'd wondered myself. But we'll come back to all of that. But I'm happy now, having read all of this, and all the links are in this presentation, so you can go and study it for yourself if you want. I'm happy that he made an honest mistake, and all he saw was a star, but he didn't realise. And it got all blown out of proportion, and it was publicly very difficult for him to admit his mistake. So now we're going to go on and we're going to talk about the electric comet, because one of the big secrets that NASA seems to be covering up is the so-called electric universe, or even the electric solar system. That electricity and electrostatic fields play a role in shaping our cosmos.
In an alternative view, comets have a much different history. This view sees comets as debris left by intense electrical activity in an earlier phase of solar system evolution, not billions of years ago, but a much more recent epoch of planetary instability and violence, one that reached even into early human times. This new perspective combines historical facts with surprising recent discoveries about comets. In the electrical interpretation, not just comets, but asteroids and meteors as well, were born in planetary upheaval, as electric arcs blasted material from the surfaces of planets and moons to produce fused formations identical in appearance to fused material in laboratory experiments with electric discharge. Here, an arriving comet moves on an elliptical path through the sun's electric field, an exceedingly weak field, but immensely powerful across the great distances of interplanetary space. As the comet draws closer to the sun, the charge imbalance triggers electric discharge, creating a coma and long cometary tail. The mysterious jets of comets can then be understood in terms of arc discharges to the nucleus, very similar to industrial electric discharge machining. The excavated material is accelerated into space along the jet's filamentary pathways. Intermittent and wandering arcs erode the surface and burn it black, leaving the distinctive scarring patterns of comet nuclei. The jets explode from the nucleus at supersonic speed and retain their coherent structure for hundreds of thousands of miles. Seen in terms of an electrically neutral vacuum in space, nothing of this sort should occur. The tails of comets reveal well-defined twisting filaments extending up to tens of millions of miles without dissipating in the vacuum of space. For proponents of the electric model, this contradiction of neutral gas behavior is no surprise. It is the testament to the comet's electrified environment. The proponents of this interpretation also say it's the electric force that holds the spherical coma in place against the solar wind as the comet races around the sun. The diameter of the visible coma will often reach millions of miles, and it's surrounded by an even larger and more improbable spherical envelope of fluorescing hydrogen, visible in ultraviolet light.
So that's an introduction to the ideas and the evidence that comets are affected by electrical activity, and that is not acknowledged in any of the astronomy textbooks in the mainstream. All you'll get is ice, snow, water, heating. That's it. All the effects on comets have to be explained in those terms. But as you'll see, Wallace Thornhill, who's one of the main proponents of the electric universe theory, he was able to predict certain things that would happen, as we're going to see, with one of the cometary probes. And he turned out to be absolutely right. Because, as I said earlier in the introduction, we've now visited a number of comets with probes, and they've collected data. There's several missions which have now given close-up pictures of the comet nuclei. We had Giotto, which visited Comet Halley in 1986. And while I was still at Lancaster University, I watched the live broadcast with Patrick Moore, who's no longer with us, from the Giotto probe as it approached the nucleus. And I distinctly remember that they were a bit disappointed because they programmed the Giotto probe, pictured here, to focus on the brightest point of the comet, which they thought would be the nucleus, but it wasn't, as it turned out, and it ended up slightly going to the side. Deep Space One, which used an ion propulsion engine, visited Comet Borrelly in 2001. I'll come back to that. And then the Stardust mission was even more ambitious because it was a sample and return mission to Comet Wild 2 in 2004. And then Deep Impact fired a probe or projectile at Comet Tempel 1 in 2005. And now we're going to look at, so this is all, this is all NASA data and ESA data and so on. It's all come out of these official, sanctioned, government-funded programs.
As indicated by the very name of the scientific mission, the theory required that a comet be constituted of stardust. But the core assumptions of comet theory could not withstand the shock from the data returned by the Stardust mission. Launched on February 7, 1999, Stardust carried with it a tray of aerogel to capture samples of comet dust from Wild 2, and it returned these samples to Earth. Scientists could then view microscopically the raw material of a comet. The first surprise was the size of the dust grains, much larger, stronger, with far more complex structure and chemistry than theory allowed. And the gel did capture trivial amounts of the expected microscopic dust, invisible to the naked eye and leaving shallow, bowl-shaped pits in the aerogel. But more common by far were much deeper tracks, more in the shape of carrots than shallow pits. The particles themselves were clearly visible to the naked eye. To their amazement, the mission scientists found elaborately developed crystalline structures in the Wild 2 dust. It was an exciting discovery, but one that challenged all prior theory of a comet's origins. Crystalline structures cannot form in the absence of minimum temperatures, temperatures unavailable in interstellar space. The spectra of silicates in cometary comas were evident as far back as the probes of Comet Halley, though largely ignored. But the mystery couldn't be ignored after arrival of the comet Halley in 1997. This comet's spectra placed an exclamation point on crystalline silicate structures in cometary comas. To get past the problem, astronomers hedged their bets. They surmised that billions of years ago, the raw material of the comet was ever so slightly warmed by an emerging sun. Then all of the discrete particles in a vast circle around the sun were transported outward by means only guessed at to the faraway and frigid Oort cloud. But this rationalization failed outright once the scientists had real comet dust in their laboratories. The grains were simply too large, and the mineralogical and chemical compositions far too complex. One puzzle was followed by another. Comet theory assumed that water ice was a primary constituent of active comets. But no water ice was detected on the nucleus of Wild 2, and not a trace of water was found in the well-preserved comet dust. And yet, paradoxically, the raw comet material of Wild 2 contained iron and sulfur minerals that can only be formed in the presence of liquid water. Liquid water, not in the near-perfect vacuum of deep space and not in a deep freeze. Instead of trivial warming, the Wild 2 minerals revealed a diversity of formative processes. Various sulfide minerals requiring liquid water can only exist below 210 degrees Celsius or 410 degrees Fahrenheit. These minerals have never seen higher temperatures. But also occurring in the comet dust was the mineral olivine, whose molecular structure rapidly breaks down in the very presence of water. It's a common igneous form, an abundant byproduct of volcanism. Perhaps the biggest surprise was that some of the comet minerals, such as forsterite, in the instant of their formation, were heated to thousands of degrees. Forsterite is formed in the most intense volcanic heating of silicates, but occurs also in lightning strikes to silicate rocks. The message could not have been more emphatic. It was not just the hypothesized Oort cloud that failed to work as advertised. The entire concept of compositional zoning as applied to comets failed its first acid test. Comet material requiring moderate temperatures in liquid water. Comet material formed at exceedingly high temperatures. Only the most trivial levels of the presumed raw material of comets, interstellar dust. A complete absence of water, despite cometary material originally formed in liquid water, though the olivine abundances could not have been formed or even survived in the presence of liquid water. And of course, liquid water requires atmospheric or other pressure. It cannot exist in the extreme vacuum of interstellar space. To this seemingly contradictory picture, we must add extreme selective heating. Selective heating because much of the compositional material could not survive the superheating that created olivine, forsterite, and other crystalline minerals. The Wild 2 discoveries have forced upon comet science one inescapable fact. In our own cosmic neighborhood, the diverse mineral content of Wild 2 is typical only of planets in the habitable zone of a fully developed sun. When the fundamentals of a theory are falsified by unexpected findings, a new vantage point is required, one that explains and predicts the surprises without introducing new contradictions.
Okay, thanks. The key thing there then is that all the data from those probes is saying comets are not dirty snowballs. They're not dirty snowballs. They're formed from materials some of which have to form in liquid water. So you can't have liquid water in a vacuum. You've got to have it in a planetary environment. Or they have very high temperatures like olivine, but yet that will dissolve in liquid water. And they came from things that are in the habitable zone of the solar system. What does that tell you?
The single most critical test of the electric comet model came on July 4th, 2005. That was when NASA's Deep Impact probe fired an 800-pound copper projectile at the nucleus of Comet Tempel 1. Cameras on the probe recorded the event, and even the projectile itself contained a camera to transmit data up to the moment of impact. As early as 2001, looking ahead to this event, electrical theorist Wallace Thornhill began registering his expectations of surprises in store for comet science. On the evening of July 3, 2005, the day before the encounter, the Thunderbolts website published the explicit predictions of Thornhill and his colleagues. These predictions would highlight the contrast between the standard and the electric comet models. As the Deep Impact probe approached Tempel 1, key NASA figures gathered in the control room. The comet was racing toward the probe at some 23,000 miles per hour when the probe launched its copper impactor toward the nucleus. If the comet was electrically charged, how would the electronics of the impactor respond to the electric field? Through most of its journey, the impactor's signal was clear, but in the final seconds, the signal was indeed disrupted. This apparent electrical disturbance was not all that Thornhill predicted. Also noteworthy was his expectation of an advanced flash ahead of the projectile's impact. This is exactly what occurred. And the advanced flash left NASA scientists scratching their heads. NASA scientists involved in the Deep Impact mission were well aware of the kinetics of impact explosions. But would the projectile be striking a solid, icy surface or a more loose aggregation of snowy fluff? What they did not anticipate, but the electric model explicitly predicted, was a major contribution from the electrical energy of the comet. The explosion would therefore be greater than any NASA scientist envisioned while working with electrically neutral conditions. It seems that the spectacular explosion that followed the impact was the greatest surprise. Every scientist viewing the live images expressed his astonishment. The scientists had expected to peer into a deep hole in a cometary dirty snowball before the Deep Impact vehicle was too far away. But the erupting cloud of silicate dust was so thick and the explosion so sustained that it completely obscured the local terrain. To the electrical theorists, the exploding cloud was a predictable effect. Fortunately, the Swift satellite provided a view of the comet explosion not just in visible light, but in ultraviolet wavelengths, which often give the best pointers to electrical events. The ultraviolet emissions required temperatures of over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperatures of the blast will explain why the initial eruption saturated the sensors on the Deep Impact probe. Calculations based on pixel saturation indicated a minimum initial temperature of the flash at almost 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Though saturation means the temperature could have been much higher. The first purpose of the Deep Impact mission was to excavate the envisioned subsurface water ice. But electrical theorists have consistently predicted little or no water on most comet nuclei. Nothing approaching the expected levels of water was detected. Absence of volatiles as a dominant factor can only mean that something is fundamentally wrong in standard comet theory.
So, where's the water? Well, I think what we're going to do is now we're going to take a break, and I've got a little bit more about the water, and then we'll move on to some other things after the break. So, what, 15 minutes is it normally? Or yeah. So thanks very much for listening to the first time. Thanks very much. I'll move that back a bit. Okay, yeah. So we'll carry on with this now and see where we get to. So we saw there just before we had the break that we had this probe called Deep Impact, and the preliminary interpretation of these data from the probe said that the upper surface of the comet may be fluffy or highly porous. The observed sequence of impact events is similar to laboratory experiments using highly porous targets. That's, wholly, lots like a sort of sponge or something like that, especially those that are rich in volatile substances. The duration of these hot luminous gas phase, as well as the continued growth of the crater over time, all point to a model consistent with a larger crater. So this is a model. They've gone on about models rather than what was actually observed. And we already saw in the video about how bright this impact was. It was far brighter than was predicted, right? And they couldn't explain this. You heard in that video how they couldn't explain it. And yet, Wallace Thornhill explained what would happen before it actually happened. So what does that tell you? He made accurate predictions. They came true. Now, just to give you a couple of examples how they want to preserve the comet as a dirty snowball model. They're desperate to keep that alive. You can go and look at some of the models from the spectrum of Tempel 1 images, or some of the images rather, and what they've modelled from this. And you can see in the caption it says, the ice-rich nucleus spectrum, which is shown by the black line, when modelled as a mixture of non-ice nucleus, and 4b, and a calculated spectrum of 70 micrometer size, water ice particles, brackets, purple, does not match at short wavelengths, while a mixture of 3 micrometer size water ice particles produces a poor match at long wavelengths. So they're trying to model the spectrographic readings that they got from their instruments to what actual substances were producing those emissions, right? But what they got was the closest model says that the ice regions contain 6 plus or minus 3% of ice. 6 plus or minus 3% of ice. If you have a dirty snowball, what sort of percentage of material do you think is going to be snow or ice? It's going to be like 99%. Their own figures say the maximum amount is 9%, in other words 6 plus 3%. So they put all these figures up about water ice in these pictures, so you see and think, oh yeah, they found water ice in the comet, but not to the extent that they say it's a dirty snowball. It's not that. It have a bit of water in it, that's all. So even their own figures show they don't have much ice. This is the best one. Again, you can go onto NASA's website. NASA's spacecraft finds Comet has hot, dry surface, of course, just like a snowball, right? Comets are sometimes described as dirty snowballs, but this is how long ago? Like, look, 12 years ago. This is 12 years ago, almost to the day, 12 years ago, right? Comet Borrelly has plenty of ice beneath its tar black surface. Oh, really? And then we go on. We know the ice is there, he said. It's just well hidden. So NASA spend hundreds of millions of dollars in getting this data, and then they throw it away. That's a pattern that you've seen me talk about here. So you can go and read that. That's on NASA's own website, tucked away in a press release, 2002. So, summary of the dirty snowball model versus the electric comet. All sources you'll find on NASA and similar websites talk about icy comets. Articles, papers and postings like the ones I showed will claim ice has been detected, therefore the dirty snowball model is correct. The other data about compounds such as olivine that could never have formed in a snowball are rarely discussed. You just ignore that. If the anomalous data are discussed, scientists would normally say, well, yes, we know about that, but it's not significant compared to the other data which proves the dirty snowball model is basically correct. To move away from the snowball model would make their lives more difficult. The electric comet model does not preclude the presence of water or water ice in cometary nuclei. The Thunderbolts website is concerned with the evidence which proves that electricity, perhaps more than gravity, has played a significant role in the formation of the galaxy and the solar system. That's what they're about. So, another problem with the dirty snowball comets. Sometimes rocky asteroids can suddenly start to turn into comets. This is from a fairly recent posting. Active asteroid P 2013 P5. Oh look, this is a Hubble spacecraft image, Hubble telescope image. November the 7th, 2013, just as I was making this presentation, Hubble sees an asteroid with 6 comet-like tails. Oh really? So what's going on? We were literally dumbfounded when we saw it, said lead investigator David Jewett. Yeah, there's a lot of dumbfounding of NASA scientists here, isn't there? We can't explain any of this data, but the dirty snowball model must be correct. Here we go. Space.com, January 6, 2011. A huge asteroid discovered more than 100 years ago. May not be an asteroid at all, but a dormant comet. It's got a tail. So what's going on? It's only the 6th known comet to reside in the main asteroid belt. So is it an asteroid belt or a comet belt? What's the difference? So the picture is not so clear-cut. And here, this was an even more recent one. I think I picked this up a few weeks ago. Hubble witnesses an asteroid mysteriously disintegrating. Perhaps it disintegrated as a result of an electrical discharge in the form of a solar flare from the sun. Perhaps that's what caused it to disintegrate, because it literally just kind of fell apart. They're drifting away from each other at a leisurely 1 mile per hour. So we've got the first image, 29th of October, second image, November the 15th, third image, the December the 13th, and the fourth image was only taken on January the 14th this year. In other words, about 3 months ago. So again, we've got all this data, which, this looks like a comet. Yet it's an asteroid which is breaking up. Now I'll talk about Comet Ison again. You can see this is an example of this blink comparator, which I showed you. This is how it was discovered. The discovery of C2012S1 Ison was announced on the 24th of September 2012. It was found by Russian astronomers Vitaly Nevsky and Artyom Novichnek on CCD images with a 0.4 meter telescope, which is 40 centimeters. Sorry, no, that can't be right. 0.4 meter telescope of the International Scientific Optical Network ISON near Kislovodsk. Can't even pronounce it. Kislovodsk, Russia. I can't pronounce Russian. The comet was further away from the Sun than Jupiter, 6.6 astronomical units distant. And that's the image they got. You can just see it. That was taken on 2 nights. And this is the only object that's moved. Well, there's one here, but that's probably something else. That will have been identified. There's a couple of objects moving, but they identified that was Comet Ison, and they have to verify this with other observations. And there's a simulator you can download, and you can look at its orbit, and you can see that it was right out beyond the orbit of Jupiter when it was discovered. Magnitude 18.8. Now, there was a big talk. You went onto the internet. Oh, it's going to crash into the Earth. Comet Ison's going to crash into the Earth, everyone. Build your underground bunker and stock it up with tinned food. They said, people were saying on the internet, Comet will crash into the Earth on in December 2013. That's what was said. So look, this is a simulation that people picked up on. Look, here's Comet Ison coming in. Look. There it is. You can see for the 20th of November, perihelion on about the 3rd of December. Look, there's the Earth. Oh no, it's going to crash into the Earth. And that's what they based it on. But what they didn't report is that the solar system is 3D. It's 3D, folks, believe it or not. So this is what it actually looked like from looking edge on from the solar system. It was actually going, I'll just try and play that again, if I can. It was basically going in an orbit which isn't in the plane of the planets. It's outside of the orbit of the plane of the planets. So though it seemed to correspond, it was actually above it. So, but you can, if people don't realise that, you can easily get away with putting out data like that, because people don't always think in 3D. Not if you present them with a 2D image and don't explain it properly. and there was a whole 3D simulation that you could run on Solar System Scope. I've got a little video, but I'm going to. It was closely watched. This comet was closely watched, and you could see it as a faint object in the sky. People were saying it was going to be really brilliant. Well, some people managed to get good images of it when it was near the sun, but then it broke up. And, you know, these are all amateur images that were taken of it. So these people are all around the world looking at this comet, you know, watching it every night. There was no chance that this thing was going to crash into the Earth. Here's another image from the stereo probe. We've actually got two comets on here. We've got, I think it's, one is Enki and one is Ison, and I can't remember which is which. I think this is maybe Comet Enki initially. I think I've got another one.
Have you seen the images of it ionising Mars atmosphere?
No, I don't think I've seen that actually. It did come close to Mars, didn't it?
It apparently lit up the atmosphere of Mars.
I didn't see those pictures. I'd have to try and trace those. Yeah, I didn't know that. I knew it came close to Mars, but I didn't know it had made the atmosphere light up. So thanks.
It had some sort of discharge from Mars, so that
Right.
created like a huge aurora.
Oh, right. No, I didn't see that. But the thing with Ison is that the coma, the cloud of material, is 60,000 miles wide, right? But the actual comet, I think, was about 2 miles. The rocky bit in the middle was 2 miles across. So the coma was, you know, they can look, it's such exaggerated in size so much. But this isn't news. This isn't news. In 2007, Comet Holmes grew to a size larger than the Sun. The coma grew to the size larger than the Sun, all right? And it was very faint and very rarefied, but it was actually, the cloud of material was larger than the Sun. And you can't explain this just by heating alone. You know, there isn't enough heat to generate that kind of cloud. There's something else going on. Now, so there's a lot of scaremongering, and we've had a couple since then, since November, of things. We had another near-Earth object 2 or 3 weeks ago. But things have crashed into the Earth. In fact, I looked this up, and there are 184 recognised impact craters around the globe. 184. And we're going to talk about some of these now a little bit. We've got one well-documented but still mysterious case of the Great Siberian Explosion over Tunguska in 1908. It is still unresolved as to what the object was. Some think it was a comet, but for the size of the explosion, a crater and or recoverable pieces would seem to have been more likely, and that nobody's really found any, despite many expeditions. Maybe nothing was recoverable due to the explosion being over a vast area of swamp. I'm very lucky with this event in Tunguska. It exploded. It was a massive explosion, flattened, I think, 200 square miles, as you're going to hear. So I've now got and this was a simulation that was done of Tunguska. So I've got a video clip about this, which might bring back a few memories.
This Russian was, in his youth, one of the first men to gaze on the scene of perhaps the most awesome destruction ever wrought on the face of the earth, and he's lived with the riddles he found there ever since. 50 years ago, he set out by horse and sledge across the frozen wastes of Siberia to investigate the great cataclysm of Tunguska. For on the morning of June the 30th, 1908, something came hurtling out of the sky, an enormous ball of fire, which exploded above the Siberian forest with a sound that was heard 1,000 miles away, and a blast that laid waste the trees over an area the size of London and New York put together. For weeks afterwards, the nights in Europe were almost as bright as day. These pictures were taken after midnight. A lifetime later, the theories still abound about what it was that came out of the sky that June day. Was it a colossal meteorite, a black hole from interstellar space, an atomic bomb long before such bombs were invented? Could it even have been a spaceship? A mystery from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001 and inventor of the communication satellite. Now living in Sri Lanka, he has studied the enigma of the Great Siberian Explosion.
So imagine that, as I'm standing here, that thing detonates 5 miles above us. Well, there would have been a flash in the sky so brilliant that by comparison the sun is a feeble electric light bulb. The flash of light and heat would have boiled the sea around us and set the city on fire instantly. Then the blast wave, the concussion, you can't use the word sound, it's just a devastating, pulverizing concussion, would have flattened all the buildings, except possibly the one immediately beneath the explosion, which might have stayed upright, as indeed in Hiroshima, buildings directly under the center of detonation remain standing. But what we're talking about now is something 1,000 times more devastating than the first atom bomb in Hiroshima.
The investigation into the mystery of the Siberian explosion began in 1921, just after the Russian Revolution. The Academy of Sciences was one of the first institutions to be set up by the Bolsheviks in Petrograd, now Leningrad. The Academy gave a commission to a young scientist called Leonid Kulik to investigate falls of meteorites on the territory of the USSR. A friend showed Kulik an eyewitness story on the back of an old calendar, his first hint of the extraordinary happening 13 years before in 1908. It was a strange time. Far away in England, the Daily Express of July the 3rd, 1908, reported the weird happenings of an already unusually hot summer. It said, "The extraordinary occurrence of night trains running over the Grampian Hills without lights took place for the first time on record." A golfer wrote to the Times saying it was light enough for play on the links at Brancaster in Norfolk at 11 p.m, and he himself was aroused at 1:15 a.m. and could read a book in his chamber quite comfortably. This photograph of Whitkirk Church in Leeds was taken long after what should have been dusk. And this houseboat at Gloucester was snapped towards midnight. What people took to be the northern lights lit up the whole east coast. The Royal Meteorological Society reported an extreme shock in southern England, followed by the vibrations of an air blast which travelled twice around the world. Kulik found similar evidence in the local press of Siberia. The Tomsk paper thought a meteor had struck. Armed with these few details, Kulik set off on the Trans-Siberian Railway from Petrograd, across European Russia and half of Siberia, to the small station of Taishet. There he and his helpers left the train and set off towards the Angara River. From there on, they had only horse and boat to take them through the ice and snow of the Siberian forest, the taiga. There were endless river crossings, made more hazardous by the spring thaw. Eventually, accompanied by the great Soviet cameraman Strukov, they reached the tiny trading post of Vanavara. The local people were fur traders, Mongols of the Evenki tribe, with hunting territory running up the Tunguska River. It was now 20 years since they had experienced the extraordinary event of 1908. It was the end of May before they made any significant progress. At one stage, the porters refused to go on towards a place they still viewed with some terror. At last, they reached the quieter waters of the upper Tunguska, and finally the junction with the river Chombi. From its southern bank, they could see that the tops of all the trees had been sheared off. They crossed the river and climbed through the battered forest to be confronted at the top of a ridge by a chilling sight. As far as the eye could see, the trees lay like an annihilated regiment in serried rows, victims of some unimaginable slaughter. Kulik, Krinov, Strukov and their helpers pressed on day after day through the debris of bare and fallen trees. They had no idea how far they would have to go to find the center of the devastation. They made camp, living as best they could with limited supplies, off the land and the water. Though even fishing had its hazards. Eventually, after fighting their way for more than 60 miles through the tangled mess of fallen trees and new growth, they reached, 20 years after the event, the heart of the explosion. Kulik was to call the place the Tunguska South Swamp, the center of 1,000 square miles of devastation. Convinced a meteorite must be the cause, Kulik immediately began surveying the mosquito-ridden swamp. He thought that pieces of the object which had caused such immense damage might be found in peculiar pits in the swamp. His men drained the pits and excavated them without result. This tree stump at the bottom of one hole was proof that this at least couldn't be a crater caused by a meteor. Kulik persisted, but not a trace of a meteor was ever to be found. The spaceship theory was born after the atomic bomb explosions of the 40s and 50s. The devastation caused by the bombs dropped on Japan was remarkably like that at Tunguska. The concrete buildings at the center of the Nagasaki blast still stood upright, as did the trees at the center of Tunguska. The charring of the trees, even signs of radiation at Tunguska, resembled atomic bomb after effects. Kulik was killed by the Nazis during the Battle of Moscow, and it was 1958 before the first post-war expedition was mounted. It was now possible to get by air to Vanavara. Although the new growth in the Tiger was now 50 years old, the devastation was still very plain. Again, there was the vile work of surveying and testing in the most impossible terrain, assaulted still by summer insects. Slowly, the evidence built up, but there was still no sign of any debris from the Tunguska blast, except for tiny globules of silica and metal. Carefully packed to be sent back for analysis, they were to provide an important clue. There were continuing echoes of a nuclear explosion. In the first place, it was clear that the Tunguska blast, like that at Hiroshima, had been an airburst. No one had thought of that in 1928. But the Russians decided to check with a precise experiment. It was true. Whatever devastated the Tiger in 1908 had exploded about 8 kilometers, 5 miles, up in the air.
Нихуя себе, это что такое? О, нихуя метеорит, блядь.
Внимание,
Ебануться. Нихуя себе.
Охренеть. Где-то упал. Слышишь? Это знаешь, что было? Это он сверхзвуковой, это похоже астероид. Это звуковая волна, астероид. Реально.
So you can see that gives you an idea of some of the devastation that can be caused. And that was a fairly small object, the Chelyabinsk one. And going back to the Tunguska event, I mean, you can see what an expedition they had in the 1920s. I mean, that was an incredible endeavour for those guys to get there through all of that, you know, uninhabited, swampy area. How did they ever do it? It's incredible. So they still do. Some people have said, you know, that was a spaceship. Some people say it was a Tesla beam weapon test. I don't know what it was, but it was something that created a lot of damage. Some people say that it matches part of Comet Enki that broke off and crashed into the Earth. That some astronomers have said that that's a good match, but I don't know. Some people have said that the Chelyabinsk was, you know, shot down, possibly. Possibly it was shot down by some system. Can't prove that, but certain people have said that. And the other thing that comes up, which I've mentioned earlier on, is the question of whether a comet actually struck England in about 532, or possibly, I think 562 is the most likely date. I discovered a couple of different dates. This comes from various bits of evidence. One interesting bit of evidence is the vitrified forts in Scotland, where you've got the walls of these hill forts have all been mysteriously turned to glass. And that was also covered on one of the Arthur C. Clarke programmes in the 1980 series that I used that other clip from. So there are unexplained vitrified rocks found in ramparts at 200 hill forts around northern Europe, dating from a few hundred years BC to a few hundred years AD. Bolivia is also reported to have had a considerable effects of some type of impact about the same time. And from the Anglo-Saxon chronicles written by Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1130 AD, and then a star of enormous size appeared to Ithir, having a single shaft, and at the head of the shaft a ball of fire in the shape of a dragon, and from the dragon's jaws 2 beams went upward. The one beam reaching towards the farthest parts of the I can't pronounce that, Efink, and the other towards, can't read that either, Iveden, which split into 7 smaller beams. And Ithir and all who saw this spectacle feared, and they asked the wise men what it might mean. And then Merdin wept and said, O nation of Britannia, now are ye bereft of Emir's something, I can't read that. That cannot be replaced. It's a loss that cannot be replaced. So he's talking about a great tragedy. And indeed you can see these mysteriously heated rocks at various places in these vitrified forts. There's no real explanation for what could have caused these temperatures outside a volcano. You know it can't have been a volcano because there aren't any volcanic eruptions in the UK from millions of years ago. So it's a very mysterious event, and Alan Wilson, sort of maintains that this was what caused a lot of the power struggle at that time, because this is what caused the Dark Ages, and England became uninhabitable for a period of between 7 and 11 years because of this disaster. So it's a very interesting thing which is very rarely talked about. And here's some of these rocks, pictures of these rocks that I discovered, and that's a vitrified rock at Dunedin Hill Fort. That picture was taken on December 3rd, 2011 in Scotland, and that's a vitrified material from Bruce's camp in Aberdeenshire, and that was taken by Murray Cook. So you can find these images on the internet of all these strangely vitrified rocks which have been dated to around this time. So the summary for comets: there's no observable risk of comet ice and crashing into the Earth. There was no observable risk, and still isn't. Asteroids and comets are probably very similar, or even the same. Fragments of larger bodies which were formed in collisions, explosions, or some type of plasma discharge erosion, which is what you'll find in that electric comet video that I use clips from. Objects do crash into the Earth every day, but the larger they are, the rarer they are, it seems. We have had more fireballs and so on in the last few years, that's true. Some people are saying we're entering a sort of cloud of material. There have been more noticed fireballs, but then again, we've got more cameras running 24/7, all-sky cameras, and all this sort of thing, people with webcams capturing them. So I think it is true that we're seeing more of them now because we've got better video equipment capturing them. But I believe the technology already exists which could be used to deflect or destroy incoming objects, but we would never, as things are now, be told about this. So I think that some of these things could be deflected or destroyed without our knowledge. And I think that really, based on what I know about 9/11, if it suited somebody that one of these objects was going to crash into the Earth and do some damage where they thought it would be a good idea, they'd let it in. They'd let it in. But if they thought it was going to be too catastrophic or didn't suit their agenda, they'd deflect it. I genuinely think that's a very strong likelihood of that, based on what I know. I think they could guide it in. I think the technology is there to do that if they wanted. Knowledge about the true nature of comets could lead to our realising more about the history of our solar system. This is what Chuck Stramick alluded to. Whether that means that a planet exploded, for example, forming the asteroid belt, or there was indeed the time when the configuration of the solar system was much different and changes were recorded by some people's tribes, and that's suggested in Symbols of an Alien Sky, which talks about some type of electrical conflagration in the solar system, which changed the configuration of the planets. And there is some evidence to support that notion. So I now want to go on, we've got a bit more time left. Really, let's look at some of this end of the world is nigh. Now, I generally don't buy into this without evidence like everything else. But really, if you're thinking about the world's end, you can pick a type of world's ending that you would like. In fact, the BBC did a whole series of programmes on this about 4 years ago called, I don't know, the end of days. I can't remember the title of it. But if you want, you can have supervolcano. People have started talking about that again because of Yellowstone having seismic activity and so on. You could have a mega tsunami. If you want that, you could have that. You could have a comet and asteroid impact, which is a genuine possible thing that could happen. Could happen any time. Could happen any time. You can have a pandemic. You can have a Planet X inbound, which I'll come to a bit more in a minute, or a super solar flare. There's probably a few I haven't got on here. So pick your end of world scenario, and if you want to be frightened of that, you be frightened of it. But in most of these cases, for us normal people, there's very little we could do about these things. We don't have anything that we could do in our knowledge about these things ourselves, if they were to happen. Now, I want to go back to this because this illustrates a couple of ways in which the fear porn, as it's called, can work. It was said by some, and you can go and find postings of this because the internet was getting going in 97, that Comet Halley would, of course, crash into the Earth. Like every single comet that comes around, you'll get postings saying, yes, this comet is going to crash into the Earth. In 1997, a string of events related to the sighting of the comet seemed to lead to a tragedy. Following the exposure of Chuck Stramick's image with a companion object, quite a frenzy ensued, which resulted in someone generating a fake image to try and give more credibility to the companion object story. This is what actually happened. A fake image was made. The secret image on January 15th, 1997, a new secret UFO picture was posted on Art Bell and Whitley Strieber's websites. After being announced for several days, they supposedly received it through Miss Prudence Calabrese and Dr. Courtney Brown, remember that name, from a mysterious astrophysicist who preferred to remain anonymous. Below are the original images released at the two sites, etc., etc. And basically, this was the original image at the bottom, and this was where they took the original image and put another object in it to lend support to Chuck Stramick's image, a supposedly independently observed image of this companion object. But it was found out by studying this image carefully, and you can read all of this on the website, that this was a fake. Somebody had made this image, deliberately faked it, and sent it to Art Bell, and it was put onto Art Bell's website and Whitley Strieber's websites. They said, oh, we don't know whether it's genuine or not, we're not sure, but here it is anyway. Loosely, the story goes that following the release of Chuck Stramick's photo, word got around that a spaceship was following Hale-Bopp. As mentioned, it was discussed on Coast to Coast. Remote viewers, Ed Dames and Courtney Brown, remember those names, Farsight Institute, get in on the story on Art Bell's Coast to Coast between late November 1996 and January 1997. Brown sends Bell the fake photo allegedly showing the companion object, which was the one I showed on the previous slide. Heaven's Gate cult members allegedly take this seriously. Ed Dames remote views a UFO and a meteor shower on the Earth a year from Hale-Bopp's aftermath. On 22nd of March 1997, members of Heaven's Gate cult committed mass suicide, allegedly thinking they were going to join the spaceship accompanying Hale-Bopp. That's what they said. All was in the report about that event. In the USA, there was something of an outcry, and Art Bell went off air for several weeks, initially saying he would never return because of this incident where 22 people, sorry, I think it was more than that, I can't remember the exact number, but many of them committed suicide, and we've got this sort of macabre video where they went in afterwards. But it was Courtney Brown and Ed Dames that were involved. Well, let's have a look at them a bit more, shall we? Ed Dames kill shot 2005. Ed Dames has repeatedly stated that the planet Earth will be subjected to a kill shot. Here is a synopsis of an Art Bell Coast to Coast broadcast on 17th of July 2004. According to Ed Dames, the harbinger of this catastrophic event will be the space shuttle program is grounded due to meteor showers. He said Earth's population will have only 3 months after this to get to the designated survival zones. Dames revealed that the survival zones are marked by crop circles, which he believes were created by an alien agency. In North America, the most survivable areas in Alberta and Saskatchewan, Dames concluded. For more info, visit thekillshot.com. I think you know where I'm going with this. Well, the Space Shuttle program ended on the 21st of July 2011. 3 months later was the 21st of October 2011. What date is it today? I don't think I need to say any more about that. Undeterred. Coast to Coast, 15th of March 2012, just over 2 years ago. Remote viewing teacher Ed Dames presented his latest insights and predictions on subjects such as the solar kill shot, safe havens going on extraterrestrial intervention, the Fukushima disaster, and war with Iran. We're not going to be hit by just one mega solar flare, but a series of them over time, perhaps in a 1 to 2 year period, that's going to turn the Earth into a veritable X-ray and proton rotisserie. 15th of March 2012. What's 1 to 2 years from 15th of March 2012? Well, I can work that out, and I'm sure you can. Let's go on. Courtney Brown. What time is it? Courtney Brown. He runs the Farsight Institute. On Red Ice Radio, 19th of July, he stated that they had performed controlled remote viewing tests for the date 01 June 2013. So that was approximately a year in the future.
We had well over 100 remote viewing sessions. It was the largest collection of remote viewing data using these types of procedures ever done before, using the best remote viewers. I decided to, in regard to the 2013 stuff, since there are multiple realities, I decided to see if we could describe the future if we identified in advance characteristics of 2 time streams for the future. I said, okay, let's describe June 1st in like 8 different places all over the globe, 2013. Let's describe it under the conditions in which X, Y, and Z happens. And now let's describe it under the conditions in which A, B, and C happens along the way. So what we tried to do with this experiment is to see if specifying characteristics of the timeline would work. So neither timeline would be our exact timeline. There is one future where these things happen and another future where these things happen, and under those 2 different futures, this is what it looks like. And hopefully we can then say, then our future is a little closer to this, to, version A, or our future is a little closer to version B. Mm-hmm. And that way we can determine it. Now, what we found, to our great surprise, and no one was more surprised than me, was that Let me first state that I didn't believe the Mayan calendar thing at all. I thought it was a piece of junk. I thought it was just garbage. I just thought it was the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. And when we got the results back, I had to say, oops, sorry. We found these huge Earth changes. I mean, huge. I mean, like right off the scale. And it was a clear binary result, meaning everything was randomized. The remote viewers knew nothing about what the targets were, and they knew there was no possible way any one of them would have known whether they were doing a session for the 2008 targets or 2013 targets. And what we got when it was all done and was all analyzed is there was a binary result. The 2008 targets, all those sessions didn't describe any disaster type of content, meaning a lot of the targets were near sea level, including Washington, D.C., but also Tuvalu, in an island in the South Pacific, Mali International Airport in the Maldives, Fort Jesus, an old Portuguese fort in the city of Mombasa on the coast of Indian Ocean, Sydney, Australia, the Opera House. So a lot of the targets were on the coast. And what we found is that in 2008, everything was normal. People were still going to the beaches, the tourists were happy, everything was fine. And for the 2013 sections, both timelines, remember we had two separate timelines we were trying to look at, they had horrific, huge planetary changes. I can describe those later on in the program if you want, but it was a huge result. I mean, it wasn't an inch of sea level or a little bit more storms. We had just, complete wipeout type disaster stuff. Washington, D.C. didn't look like Washington, D.C. anymore. It was, Hawaii didn't look like Hawaii anymore in terms of the main island of Oahu. So, it was just one thing after the next, tsunamis, things like meteors coming in.
So tsunamis, meteors coming in, that was all going off on the 1st of June. Did you notice any of that? Because I didn't. But this is what people are saying. This is what people are doing. It's an industry. It's an industry. Arch Crawford, you can go and look at his website. He works on the stock market, I think, a financial analyst, and he predicted in November 2013, which I think was about a week before I gave this presentation. He uses astrology to predict what will happen in markets due to that he has been named a top analyst for a few different years in the markets. He is predicting major events for November, and due to planetary alignments, he is predicting a solar flare kill shot possibly happening on the 13th of November 2013. Anyone seen a pattern here at all? Eric Julian, 2006. What will occur on May 25th, 2006? Perhaps a planetary catastrophe originating from the Atlantic Ocean due to a medium-sized impact event. On this assumption, a series of giant waves, including one mega tsunami, almost 200 meters in height, will be born from a succession of underwater eruptions. Anyone notice that happening on May 25th, 2006? I didn't either. Now then, Jehovah's Witnesses. I think they invented end-of-world predictions myself. Well, no, they didn't really. That's being unfair to them. They've made an industry out of it, though, I think. When I have the witnesses at the door, I say, do you know who founded the Jehovah's Witnesses order? And they say, oh, Taze somebody. Yeah, that's right, Charles Taze Russell. Do you know where he's buried? No, I don't know that. Well, go and look it up then. He's buried under an 8-foot high pyramid, right? And that's what's in the centre of it, at the top there. What does that look like, everybody? They found the Bible Watchtower Study Group. Russell himself predicted an end-of-world scenario would happen in 1914. 1914. There are a number of websites which carefully show, typo there, where the JWs have been completely inconsistent over the last few decades with their published writings and statements. As one reads the prophet's statements below, it is important to bear in mind just how bold the organisation is in claiming the direct inspiration of God in what it publishes. But what you will observe is an ever-changing system of doctrine. Now, about 100,000 witnesses left the order in 1975 when yet another end of times prediction had failed. 100,000 witnesses left in 1975. And this, if you go through this website, they had end of world predictions in 1888. I'm not going to read out all of this. This is quoting from their own literature. 1914 was the big one. That didn't happen, so then they revised it to 1915. Next one was 1922. The next one was 1931. The next one was 1968, when they were saying there's going to be famine by 1975. And it goes on. 1954, 1956, 1969, 208, Alex, and then we've got these. Actually, I'm going on to some other hundreds of Armageddon predictions that have come from extraterrestrials. These have all come from sources such as Frances Swan. She said it was going to end in 1956, although she did say some very interesting other things. So what it seems to be is that this information which comes from extraterrestrials, some of it seems to be all right, but they keep predicting the end of the world, and it hasn't happened. Alex Collier predicted it that in 2007 that Saudi Arabia will become the North Pole, Atlantis, Lemuria, and the hollow inner Earth, and the reincarnation will be scientifically proven in 2007. Well, I'm not sure about the reincarnation. That's a different issue, but we know that didn't happen. So, some people have said that Planet X is 9. Right? It's here, can't you see it? Can't you see Planet X in the skies? Nancy Lyder, Jim McCanny may at times sound like convincing people. These claims have been ongoing for about 10 years, and they've probably started as a result of the research of Zecharia Sitchin, which I'm sure a few people are familiar with, which I'm not saying is wrong. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. The Sumerian tablets talk about planet Nibiru, which has a 3,600-year orbital period around our sun, right? Which may be correct, I don't know. I think it's looking less likely now. And he talks about the Sumerian cosmology, and you can look all of this up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Nibiru is also called the planet of the passage. Every 3,600 years in the transition to its perihelion, that's so close to the sun, and the inner planets, Nibiru, due to the gravitational perturbations due to its mass, it would be the source of great upheavals and cataclysms on Earth. Nancy Lyder, she said that Planet X was inbound, and she said that in 1997, Comet Halley was put on a spectacular show, even moving across the Orion area, very near where the mythical Planet X was supposed to be. Pretty strange for a distraction. She said it was a distraction, but it was a distraction that was moving right across the area where she said it was. Nancy Lyder is still talking about the planet being visible on SOHO images from 2009 and 2010. It's not there. You can read all of this on her newsletter. She points out these objects. They are not Planet X. Jim McCanny, he said that Planet X could, far out in the solar system, Planet X type objects could become enshrouded in clouds of dust and gas and thus be hard to see, said McCanny. But he noted that a large object could be quite visible by the time it reached Pluto. Once in this position, such an object could take hundreds of years to approach Earth, or it could come in at a super speed in a matter of weeks, he warned. So it can do anything you like, basically, you know, just depending on what story you want to put out. And this McCanny, again, I listened to him quite a lot a few years ago, and he calls himself Professor McCanny, but he doesn't have any evidence of his qualifications. He does appear to know a bit about maths. He did work as a lecturer, but I don't think he's a professor. McCanny talks about the electric universe as well, but he appears to be a kind of muddle up of the electric universe. Some of the stuff that McCanny comes out with is just nonsense. Some of it is all right. Planet X Nibiru, I'm getting towards the end now. This is one I received a few years ago. Militia alert, this is not a test. I've received information from several sources, including military. All militia are immediately on high alert. I hope you have all your preparations in order, my friends. It's going to be an interesting weekend. That's a very vast understatement, by the way. So,
what was the date?
That was about 2012, I think, that one came out. Yeah, so I was getting all these people saying, oh, Planet X is coming in and stuff like this. I said, okay, send me some pictures. I said, amateur astronomers have been sighting Planet X for over 100 of them have cited it. I said to this person, this is somebody writing to me about Planet X, have you got any links to the photographs? Can I see some photographs? I'd be very interested to see them. I said, can you send me a link? Photos claiming to show Planet X. None of the ones I've looked at actually show it. They show various images, things from CCD artifacts, overexposure to sundogs, to blank areas of an image, lens flares, it's all kinds of things. This is the image he sent me. I took it from Eastern Penobscot, Maine, looking west on October 2nd, 2012, with a 12 megapixel Fuji digital camera and a green number 12 filter. There are thousands on poleshift.ning.com. That's an image of Planet X, according to this guy. That is a very, very bright object. That, to me, is an image of the sun with a green filter in front of it. He's probably claiming that this is Planet X here, I think. He didn't make that clear in his description. It came from the direction of Orion in 1983, came into solar system in 1999, came around from behind the sun in 2003 and stopped. So I've been talking about an object 1 to 2 miles in diameter that was discovered by amateurs out beyond the orbit of Jupiter. This guy is talking about an Earth-sized planet within the orbit of Mars. Planet X is 29,000 miles in diameter. This is from the guy who said that he'd taken this picture. Cloudy, oceanic, volcanic, atmospheric planet. 30 million miles from Earth, below the line from Earth to the Sun at about 5 o'clock. It's about 5 million miles long tail pointed right at Earth. So I said it's roughly 3.5 times bigger than the Earth, and it's about 7 times bigger than Mars. And it's 30 million miles from us. It's about a third of the distance to the Sun, and 6 times nearer than Mars, so I guess it should be about 40 times bigger in the sky than Mars. It would be a naked eye object. You would not need a telescope to see it. That's a pretty big object, and if it's greenish as your photo suggests, it should be pretty obvious. Should be pretty obvious. And then he just wrote back, go to zetatalk.com, which is Nancy Lyder's site, where she's been claiming Planet X is inbound for 10 years. Nobody's seen it. Nobody's seen it. None of the amateurs have seen it. Now, one of the stories where this came from, you see, where this Planet X mythology started, was with the IRAS probe. And I heard somebody talking about this only a couple of weeks ago on the Veritas show, I think it was. IRAS, the infrared astronomical satellite, was launched 26th of January 1983. For several months, IRAS surveyed the sky in infrared, detecting objects too faint to be seen in visible light. So it's even fainter than optical telescopes can detect. In 1983-84, stories began that it had detected an object that was way out in the solar system, but too faint to be seen in the normal optical range. It was tentatively suggested by 1 or 2 scientists it could be a distant 10th planet, Planet X, or a brown dwarf equals a cool star. Stories appeared in the Washington Post, 30th of December, and the New York Times, 30th of January. And this was only 4 days after the launch. It had only been up in space for 4 days. It was going around the Earth. It didn't go out into distant places. 4 days, they somehow got this data in 4 days to show that there might be a planet. And it was reported on September the 10th, 1984 as well. Now you can find loads of videos, I don't have time to play this because we're up to time, claiming that there is a cover-up about Planet X. This one shows illustration because it doesn't say where this image was taken, it doesn't say what direction it was pointing, it doesn't say who took it, it just said it came from the NASA website. And it's very easy to check that this is not what the images claim to be. In fact, I checked up on this.
I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this photograph. This photograph was supposedly taken from the South Pole telescope that was designed and built for the monitoring and tracking of Planet X, also called Nibiru. This is the base photograph. 2 days ago I found the second photograph, similar to this. The only difference is that in this photograph, it reveals coordinates on the bottom. This photograph was taken off of a gentleman's YouTube video, which was later removed thus after. The coordinates are but 5 hours, 33 minutes, 27 seconds, -6, 10 degrees, 56. Now, I thought to myself, if I were to take these same coordinates and plug them into Google Earth Sky if I may possibly get the same image. Seeing how that these images were taken in 2007, around that time period, right after the South Pole Telescope was first opened, and Google Earth Sky originated in 2007, I thought there might be some possible similarities in the pictures. So let me just open up Google Earth here and I'll show you what I found. Now if we just go to View, Explore, and switch the sky. Now I took the same coordinates, which I will show you here. 5 hours, 53 minutes, 27 seconds, -6, 10, 58. Now, I will take those coordinates, zoom out here, and let's begin the search. And I think you'll be pretty amazed at what you find. Looks there that we went into a big dark hole. Now, as you can see, there's no stars around or anything in this image. But if we slowly back out, you'll notice that in this exact image, there was just a cropped out circle, square, of absolutely nothing. This is the only image found in Google Earth Sky where it is completely blacked out. Now, if you zoom in really close, there's proof here that this is not just a false image. You see here this background star? The star is cut directly in half. And up here there's a little information tab, and when you click on it, what comes up, I'm not sure if you can see that, but all it says is this. I don't know what this means. I clicked on it, but it went to a dead link. Well folks, there you have it. There's more proof that Nibiru possibly does exist, and there's a big cover-up right now. And what worries me even more is the fact that someone went to the great extent of blocking out this image, and for the public to see what is possibly imminently coming. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
But you can basically check up where these images are, and you can point your telescope in that direction. Is there a planet there, or isn't there a planet there? So these are the people that have been promoting the Planet X story. Marshall Masters, who has a survivalist website, YOW USA. John Moore, does radio shows. Now Jason Martelli is one of the good guys. He talks mainly about Sitchin. He's mainly focused on that. He's more well informed, Jason Martelli. He's not trying to do the fear porn bit. He's not focused on what they call preparing for disaster, which is a mini industry now. is on Marshall Masters' website. They claimed by 2007, Planet X would be inside the orbit of Jupiter, and he's drawn out all these charts, and this says from April 2007 to July 2014, right? This is the period. So we're talking now, this current time. This is where it would be. We'd be able to see it. Planet X passes through perihelion and maximum electrical interaction with the Sun begins. And this is from February 14th, 2013. This is a year ago. This is the most catastrophic period for Earth and peaks when Earth moves between Planet X and the Sun. Cataclysm possibilities, supervolcano eruptions, nuclear winter ice age, Earth shifts on axis. Anyone notice that happening a year ago? I didn't. So, further study of this IRAS data, they revisited this, and I looked up a paper on this. Again, I've got all the details about it. I haven't got time to read it all out. I can send anyone the links. In fact, it's already on my website, these links, so you can go and read these. The other objects, as the article stresses, were identified as very faint galaxies. So when they further looked at this data, these were just very bright objects, but they were a long way away. All right? So that's what this IRAS data turned out to be. Now, whenever you hear the stories of Planet X and IRAS data, that was 1983. That was 30 years ago. We've had more astronomical data since then, a lot more. But nobody ever quotes that. They just go back to the 1983 data and claim there's been a cover-up ever since. Planet X in the Daily Express, just a week ago. Huge super-Earth planet, 10 times bigger than our own world, could be orbiting the Sun. Could, not is, could. This suggests that a massive outer solar system perturber may exist and restricts Omega for the inner Oort cloud objects. This was another planetoid, only 280 miles across, called 2012 VP113. It's just been discovered, and it was put into the Nature journal. We numerically simulated the effect of a super-Earth mass body. We numerically simulated the effect. That is not the same as observing it. They simulated it. Remember the difference between simulation and observation. And they thought that this could explain why they detected this object coming in a particular orbit, this 2012. It's like the Sedna object. It's a new one that they've just discovered. Nothing has yet been found, just simulations. The study also states that it is likely that more of these small, 200-odd mile objects will be discovered. So, Planet X conclusions. I have seen no credible evidence that there is a large planet anywhere in our solar system. Right? There may be something way out. It may be, for example, that Nibiru is real, I don't know, but it changed its orbit. Something happened and it's moved out of the solar system now, and we're not going to see it again, maybe never, or not for a long, long time. All the Planet X predictions so far have been hopelessly wrong. Hopelessly wrong. Just look at the evidence that their own statements are just wrong. Okay? And at least some of those promoting these stories don't understand the figures they are using and the images they are seeing. They don't seem able to compare them to data about the solar system that we already know and can observe. The Sun may indeed have a binary star companion or an additional planet, but it must be extremely difficult to detect if it is there, bearing in mind that objects smaller than Pluto have recently been observed at far greater distances. Over 1,000 extrasolar planets that's outside the solar system have now been detected by using the Kepler mission, which I haven't really talked about. Though NASA could well be covering up knowledge about a present or ancient Planet X, it would be far more difficult to keep amateur astronomers quiet about such things. They'd want their names in the history books. They would want it. And that's what the sort of thing they would love to discover. But it does seem there may have been another planet in our solar system, which I think is probably what they're covering up, the exploded planet. That's probably what this is about. That's why, going back to the electric universe and this bit about the comet material being from planets in the habitable zone, if we had an Earth-like planet between, say, Mars and Jupiter that exploded through a collision or something, then that's where this cometary debris came from. That's, I think, probably what it is. All right? It's as simple as that. So, comets come around every few years, but are currently not predictable in the way that they will appear to us. We don't know exactly when they're going to appear. More observations and better technology allow us to catalogue and analyse comets and near-Earth objects more thoroughly, but this does little or nothing to increase our safety from the effects they could have at short notice, like I said before. Planet X may be out there, but if it is, it's a long way off and probably not that big or warm or hot. Catastrophists and preachers will likely exploit the fears created by the passage of comets and the occurrence of natural disasters as they have always done. 21st of December 2012 was said by many to be some kind of cut-off date, but I feel little different we're now in April 2014 compared to this time last year. I, for one, have not ascended. However, I think we are involved in some kind of transition and you're all playing your parts in that. I don't really deny that. So I just picked some of these things I picked up on the internet. You've survived the Doomsday 2012 scenario, so congratulations, everyone. And I think there is a consciousness shift happening. This is another one you'll see, the US Navy map with half of the US submerged. It could happen, but any date put on that, I don't believe a date can be put on that. We're still here, keep going. All the end of world predictions so far have been wrong, right? Sadly, we have borne witness to quite a few disasters in the last 20 years, as you all know. I don't really need to name them. These will continue to occur. The exploitation of fear will only end when the knowledge of hidden advanced technologies that can change the whole game is more widely understood, and those covering up this knowledge are fully identified and their agenda halted. Then we will not be subject to the same degree to all the factors that have caused some of the terrible events we've seen in the last few years. Right? So we've got to get away from this fear paradigm, and I've tried to show you the evidence which proves that some of these fear stories are just completely, off the mark. So that's basically it. I will take questions. Those are some of the websites I've used. This whole presentation is already on my website, so you can follow up some of these links. And I'd like to thank you for sitting through to the end of it, and I hope it's been of some use. Thank you very much. Okay, I've got a question there from the lady in the red jersey. Yeah.
Coming back to your mass prediction theory, I was living in Kansas in 1995, and there was one of the guys I worked with was a member of this group that was sitting around the house with an annotated Bible saying the world was going to end in 1995.
Right.
When 1996 came around, I said, well, what's happened to it? He said, oh, it's over, it has ended, we just don't know about it yet.
Well, that's a good way of getting out of it, isn't it? So, yeah, I think you get people saying that. Any other questions?
That asteroid that hit Britain, you dwelt on Scotland, but did that Wilson fellow say it hit Wales?
Well, apparently what happened is it came down from the northeast and travelled southwest. Where it actually crashed, I'm not sure if that's been established, because the line goes right over to South America, and it takes it over Bolivia, and apparently there's some effects there that are seen in some of the geology there and so on, as I understand it. I haven't researched that very much. So it appears that the actual devastation was caused by possibly exploding in the atmosphere, perhaps into multiple fragments, which may have landed across in a wider area.
So it could have crossed Wales then?
Yes, yeah, it could well have crossed Wales.
Well, there's a story that the devastation was so terrible that the Welsh set off in boats and sailed to America.
Yeah, that might well be part of the story.
And some of the fellows that landed in America, they were Welsh-speaking Indians.
Yeah, I've heard actually. Yeah, I've heard some of that story. So you could be right.
Is it in the geological record that there was a tsunami in the Dark Ages in the North Sea?
I don't know. I haven't researched that. It'd be an interesting one to research. But if the object broke up, then it may have just come down as a set of small fragments. I mean, I'm not sure if anybody's put a size on it, because it's very rarely talked about. Because if you start getting into the story of King Arthur, and stuff like that, it upsets a lot of people in this country. I mean, that's what Alan Wilson's experienced.
Well, it upsets all the academics.
Yeah.
They work it all out, and if you say something different, they don't like that.
Yeah. Any other questions at all? Gentleman back there. Well, I think what happens is you get, well, I don't know, it could be ionisation of some kind, but as I understand it, you'll get a lot of dust thrown up into the atmosphere, and that dust reflects the sunlight from below the horizon, which then illuminates the other countries that are in darkness by reflected light coming up from below the horizon, going up into the atmosphere, and then being reflected down. Because a lot of that material could have gone up into the upper atmosphere, way above the normal level of clouds. I think that's how it works. Any other questions?
Yeah, that was a very good answer.
Thank you.
Can you tell us when Doomsday is?
I think it's next Tuesday. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.